What's up YouTube, Capital G here, once again talking about Master Rule 5 in this video. After all, it is one of the most anticipated changes of the last decade to the Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading card game, and a lot of people are excited for the change. In this video, I want to take a quick trip down memory lane and discuss some forgotten but still absolutely amazing extra deck cards that I believe we're going to be seeing a lot of come Master Rule 5, but cards that kind of fell off the map during the Reigns era. Now, before I jump into the list, let me give a big shout out and thank you to our sponsor. This video is brought to you by the Domain Trading Card Game. Looking for something to heat up your winter before Yu-Gi-Oh! Gets Master Rule 5? Look no further than Domain, an ambitious, fast-paced online card game with excellent balance and strategic gameplay. Domain is similar to Yu-Gi-Oh! Duelist of the Roses, but amps up the intensity with an ever-changing game board, which ensures that no two games will ever play out the same. You can check out the online tutorial for instructions and start playing with one of 8 pre-made structure decks which cover all skill levels. Domain is completely free and the fan base is growing rapidly. Start playing now at enterthedomains.com and check out their Discord. Both will be in the description. Number 1, Totally Awesome. So I decided to start with Totally Awesome because to me it is the single most obvious card on this list. Totally Awesome has already been the topic of many conversations since Konami announced Master Rule 5, and it's for good reason. I feel like this is going to be one of the most powerful Exceed monsters in the entire game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Sure, Totally Awesome saw some play during the Reigns era. It was almost exclusively relegated to Paleozoic frog builds and, decks kind of similar to that. You didn't really see it in a bunch of Yu-Gi-Oh! Extra decks, and that's quite the shame because during the Arc V era, this was a card that we saw a lot of, and a lot of those decks didn't play frogs at all. I'm of course referring to the Bahamut Shark Totally Awesome play, which was an absolute terror during the Yu-Gi-Oh! Art V era. Decks like Totally Heroes and Mermills could easily slap down 2 level 4 water monsters. This was a piece of cake, especially with Elder Entity Norden being legal at that time. I feel like this is going to be something that you're going to start seeing again in Master Rule 5. Not only can those archetypes summon the Totally Awesome Bahamut Shark combo fairly easily, but even archetypes like Fluffles are now incorporating this into their game plan to give them some really solid go first options. And in case you haven't noticed, sharks are going to be getting more support in Eternity Code. I've already seen some duels where they can open double Bahamut Shark double Toad turn 1, and believe you me, it's just as scary as it sounds. Number 2, TG Hyper Librarian. There were actually a couple of times during the 5Ds era where I argued that this card should have been outright banned because it was just that powerful. Contrary to popular belief, all this time later, TG Hyper Librarian really hasn't been power creeped at all. There aren't that many cards in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! That give you the potential of drawing an unlimited amount of cards, and Hyper Librarian is one of them. I'd argue that TG Hyper Librarian barely even functioned properly in the Reigns era because it was very unlikely that you were going to be able to go into a Link monster and still have the resources left necessary to summon Librarian itself and the subsequent synchro monsters that you need to, draw cards off of Librarian. And then when you couple that with the fact that Konami just withheld the single greatest piece of synchro support in the form of a Link monster in Crystron Needle Fiber from the TCG until, well, pretty much the Reigns era was over, it just wasn't going to be a very good era for the card. But now in Master Rule 5, just like it was previously in Master Rule 3, you are not going to need Link monsters at all. I've already seen a lot of the older synchro focused archetypes like Laval's be able to drop multiple copies of Shooting Quasar Dragon or Cosmic Blazar Dragon without even thinking about summoning a Link monster. Of course, TG Hyper Librarian is always going to be associated with those plays because the more you synchro summon, the more cards that you're going to draw. These cards can be defensive options, or, well, usually they'll just be cards that help you extend upon your combo. And of course, the more copies of Librarian that you summon, the more cards that you're going to draw as well. TG Hyper Librarian is going to see play again because a lot of those synchro combo decks are going to see play again. Number 3, Fright for Sabretooth. Alright, I'll admit it, this is the one that I am most concerned about, but I really wanted to have a fusion monster on this list because, Fusion's my favorite favorite mechanic and all that good stuff. The hype right now is real for Fluffles. I've been on the Fluffle Facebook group and it has been booming over the last couple of weeks. People talking about that archetype, showing off builds. I feel like there has been so much excitement around this archetype, but I think that it's justified. Number one, Fluffles are actually going to have some solid, good turn one plays, and this is something that even if you tried to make this archetype work in the Vrains era, they just didn't have. There was essentially nothing that you could do while playing Fluffles going first that would really scare your opponent. Nothing actually Fluffle based, but as I said earlier in the video, now Fluffles can make multiple negations going first. I've seen combos where they're able to summon a number 38 Titanic Galaxy in addition to a totally awesome Bahamut Shark, which gives them even more negation. We all know the power of the archetype going second. There aren't many archetypes in Yu-Gi-Oh! That can routinely put anywhere from 40 to 50,000 damage on board in a single turn, but we know that Fluffles is one of those decks, and I think a lot of people are forgotten. There's this little link monster called Clawfeet coming out in Ignition Assault that is really going to work wonders for this archetype, and really any deck that likes to fusion summon a lot, Clawfeet is amazing, allowing you to summon one of your monsters back from the graveyard. That monster of course can, be used as fusion material or for Xyz summoning, etc, etc. It's an awesome card going first or second. So when I look at a card like Fright for Sabretooth and I look at the Fluffle archetype in general, I think it's going to be more consistent than it ever was. I feel like it's going to have options for going first and second, and it's actually going to get some indirect link support even though it doesn't necessarily need it. I feel like the arrow's definitely pointing up for Fluffles, and I feel like a lot of people are looking at this archetype to play it. Number 4, Leviair the Sea Dragon. This card was absolutely ridiculous at the beginning of the Zexal era. It seemed like a lot of the decks in the game were just playing this card. Xyz rank 3s were incredibly easy to summon, and this card was amazing in decks like Dino Rabbit, being able to easily go in it off the normal summon of a tour guide, detach a material, summon back one of your rescue rabbits to go into another Revolver monster was pretty damn epic back in the day, but this is a card that was really killed by Master Rule 4. It's kind of an Xyz monster that facilitates the summon of more Xyz monsters, and obviously having multiple Xyz monsters just really wasn't that ideal in Master Rule 4, but when you remove those shackles of having to have link monsters on field, this card can shine again. Keep in mind, there are a lot of dark attribute archetypes out there that can go into rank 3s fairly easily and banish a lot of their monsters. Ones that come to mind include Dark World, Infernity, maybe even Burning Abyss. All of these decks can incorporate things like a Lord of Darkness, and when you normal summon a tour guide, go straight into a Leviair and are able to summon that monster that you just banished back from a Lord of Darkness, it's a pretty nice play, especially considering you can still go into other Xyzs. But of course, dark attribute archetypes aren't the only ones that are going to benefit from Leviair the Sea Dragon. I've already seen Madoche players discussing picking up Leviair again. You might not actually know this, but Leviair was pretty much a staple in the Madoche extra deck during the Zexal era. The card kind of died off during Vrains, but it's still very solid for the Madoche strategy. Of course, a card like Madoche Hootcake banishes one of your Madoche monsters to summon another one from your deck, and Madoche Hootcake is a level 3, so it kind of facilitates the summon of rank 3s. Some of those Madoche monsters like Mesh and Gelato are not hard once per turn, so it kind of benefits the archetype as a whole. I feel like people have kind of forgotten how good Leviair is, but decks like Infernity, Madoche, they're definitely going to consider playing this card once again in Master Rule 5. And finally, number 5 for Master Rule 5, the Phantom Knights of Breaksword. This card was always super good in my book, and low-key, it was one of the few Xyz monsters that could really put the fear of God in me, especially when you were actually seeing it, and maybe a PK Fire variant from like the Arc V era. I think that, obviously in the Vrains era, the only extra deck card for Phantom Knights that anybody wanted to talk about was Rusty Bardiche, because that card was broken beyond belief, but Breaksword is still a really solid generic rank 3, essentially a scrap dragon if you are playing a deck with a bunch of level 3 monsters, a card that can target itself and any card on your opponent's side of the field and just blow it up. It's excellent utility because it doesn't have to be itself. You can use one of your field spells or essentially a card on your side of the field that doesn't have all that much utility, maybe something that you've already used up. But really the brilliance of this card, and we saw this a lot during Arc V, is when you're actually playing it in conjunction with the Phantom Knights. Keep in mind, if you got some PKs in your graveyard, you can blow up the copy of Breaksword, then summon those PKs back from the graveyard, and you're essentially going to get yourself a free rank 4. An Exceed monster that blows opponent's cards up and then replaces itself with another Exceed monster is always going to be good in my book. And even if you aren't actually playing Phantom Knights, this card just becomes a solid piece of utility. That's where I think that Breaksword may have faltered in the Vrains era. A lot of people were not willing to use their extra monster zone on Breaksword and have it kind of be stuck there, because a lot of times you may have something else that you want to blow up, but if the Breaksword is clogging up your extra monster zone, you weren't able to do any more plays. That's not going to be a problem in Master Rule 5 because obviously you can just summon it to a main monster zone. I feel like the Phantom Knights as an archetype are going to be a lot more viable because you can splash them with Burning Abyss. You can make a bunch of Dantes, but if you do need some spot removal, Breaksword is definitely going to be your man. Anyways, what do you guys think of some of these cards? And if there are some other old forgotten extra deck cards that maybe I missed out on, leave those in the comment section below. I can't wait until we get the Master Rule 5. It honestly can't come soon enough. Thank you guys for watching. As always, subscribe if you have not already and turn on that notification bell for daily videos.